Imagine you're sitting on your couch, on a nice quiet Sunday morning. You're reading this complex, beautifully written article in a second language.
Oh, that's a great feeling.
Right. You're absorbing every subtle nuance. You're even laughing at the jokes in the text. In that moment, you just feel completely, wonderfully fluent.
Yeah, you're on top of the world.
Exactly. And then your phone rings. You look down and you see it's a native speaker of that exact same language calling you. So you pick up the phone, you open your mouth to offer just a normal friendly greeting, and nothing comes out.
Nothing at all.
Your mind just goes completely blank. You end up mumbling these few broken words, and suddenly you feel like an absolute beginner who hasn't studied a single day in their life.
Yeah, well, it is an incredibly frustrating contradiction, isn't it? I mean, people pour years into studying, and when that freeze happens, they often internalize it. Like it's a sign that all their hard work was just totally wasted.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are really glad you're joining us, because if you have ever felt that crushing moment of freezing up, we want you to know you are absolutely not alone.
No, definitely not alone. It's so common.
Today, we are unpacking a really fascinating stack of sources. We've got applied linguistics papers, cognitive psychology research, and some clinical case studies too, all to explore this thing that researchers call the silent gap.
A silent gap, yes.
So, okay, let's unpack this. The mission for our conversation today is to basically map out the hidden mechanical reasons behind this freeze and walk through the evidence-based solutions to actually overcome it.
And to start, I really want to clarify something for you, the listener, and this is based directly on the research. If this freezing happens to you, it is not a personal failure.
That's such an important point.
It really is. It does not mean you lack intelligence or, some special talent for languages.
Yeah.
What you are experiencing is actually a highly documented physiological phenomenon.
Right.
The core issue we see in the literature is that traditional education has fundamentally taught us to view language fluency through completely the wrong lens.
Yeah, that totally dismantles the way we're usually taught to view fluency. I mean, we treat knowing a language as just one big single muscle.
Yes.
The assumption is always that you either know the language or you just don't.
Exactly. But the scientific literature completely separates them. Understanding a language and speaking a language, they are not the same cognitive muscle at all.
They're completely different.
Totally different. They draw on entirely different neural pathways and memory systems in the brain. Comprehension, meaning reading and listening, that is primarily a recognition process.
Okay, a recognition process.
Right. When you read a word on a page, your brain simply has to match that incoming visual signal to a piece of existing knowledge. It's a passive memory task.
It's also a very forgiving environment,
Yeah.
Like if you're reading a book and you lose the thread of the argument, you just stop. You let your eyes drift back up the page and you reread the paragraph.
Exactly. Or if you're watching a video, you can just hit rewind.
Yeah, you have the luxury of time.
You do. But production, which is the physical act of speaking, that removes literally all of those safety nets. Speaking is a generative, real-time process.
Generative, meaning you're creating it from scratch.
Right. You are relying on active recall rather than just passive recognition. And you are executing this active recall under a tremendous amount of social and, temporal pressure.
Yeah, the sources quantified just how intense that pressure really is. In a standard fluid conversation, you have a window of about 1 to 2 seconds to respond to a statement before the pause begins to feel, socially awkward.
Just 1 to 2 seconds. It's incredibly fast.
Let's think about what the brain is actually attempting to accomplish in that tiny little window. First, you have to interpret what the other person just said.
Right.
Then you have to search your memory to retrieve the correct vocabulary for your response.
Yep.
You have to assemble those individual words into a grammatically correct structure.
And you have to manage the physical muscles in your mouth to get the tone and pronunciation right.
Oh, right. And finally, you have to monitor the other person's facial expressions to ensure they're actually understanding you.
All of those complex cognitive tasks are running completely simultaneously. When we break it down into those individual components, the act of speaking a second language fluently is honestly, it's an astonishing feat of mental engineering.
It really is. It sounds like the difference between eating a beautifully cooked meal at a high-end restaurant and actually being a chef on MasterChef with a ticking clock.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Because eating the meal is comprehension. You can appreciate the complex flavors, you recognize the quality, and it's this wonderful passive experience.
You just enjoy it.
But being the chef requires you to chop the onions, sear the meat, and plate the dish perfectly while someone is literally counting down from 3 minutes. That is production. Just because you can recognize a good meal doesn't automatically mean you possess the active skills to cook it under pressure.
That is perfectly said. In applied linguistics, researchers actually use a specific term for this dynamic. They call it the input-output gap.
Input-output gap, okay.
Yeah. A learner might possess a massive internal library of passive knowledge, built up through years of reading books and watching movies. The books are definitely in the library.
Right.
But the problem is that the learner lacks the index system to retrieve those books instantly when the clock is ticking. This input-output gap perfectly explains why someone who consumes, hours of foreign media every day can still completely blank in a live conversation.
I am struggling with the mechanics here, though.
How so?
Well, the human brain processes information at lightning speed. If the vocabulary is genuinely stored in that internal library, what physically stops it from coming out during those 1 to 2 seconds? Like, why does the system just crash?
The crash happens because of a very specific bottleneck in the brain, and that's called working memory.
Working memory.
Right. Working memory is the mental workspace where your brain holds and manipulates information in real time. You can think of it like a small table. And cognitive psychology shows us that this table has a very strict capacity limit.
How strict are we talking?
Well, for the average human, working memory can only hold about 4 to 7 items of information at any given moment.
Wow, okay. So when you are speaking your native language, you don't need much space on that table because the grammar and vocabulary are fully automatic.
Right.
You don't have to think about conjugating a verb. It just happens.
Exactly. But when you speak a second language, those sub-processes are not automatic yet. So you are placing the vocabulary search on the table. You're placing the grammar rules on the table.
You're placing pronunciation on the table.
Yes. And the workspace fills up incredibly fast.
Well, the research points to one specific habit that overloads this workspace completely, and that is mental translation.
Oh, absolutely. Mental translation is the heaviest cognitive load a learner can carry. I mean, many learners believe they are thinking in their second language.
Sure, they feel like they are.
But the data reveals that under a heavy cognitive load, for instance, when a learner is trying to explain a complex idea or express some nuanced emotion, the brain secretly reverts to the native language.
Wow.
Yeah, the learner constructs the thought in their native language first, and then attempts to translate it word for word in real time.
That essentially forces the brain to act as a simultaneous interpreter and a conversationalist at the exact same moment.
Right.
Let's look at the math of that on the working memory table. You are holding the native language sentence, the search for the second language vocabulary, and the grammatical rules of both languages. I mean, you easily exceed that 4 to 7 item limit.
You blow right past it. The system gets completely overwhelmed by the traffic jam of competing information. And when working memory exceeds its capacity, it doesn't just, slow down. It actively drops information to protect the system.
It just drops it.
Yeah, it simply abandons the sentence mid-construction. That is the physical mechanism behind the freeze.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. That completely changes the framing for the listener.
How do you mean?
Wait, so when someone drops a sentence and thinks, oh, I just forgot all my words, that's not actually true.
No, it's an illusion. The words were not forgotten, they were just blocked by the translation traffic jam.
That is mind-blowing.
And we can prove this, too, by looking at how learners handle low-stakes, everyday phrases. The research notes that simple greetings, like saying good morning or how are you, they almost never cause a working memory crash.
Because those phrases don't require original sentence construction. You don't build how are you word by word, pulling each piece from the library.
Right. You retrieve the entire phrase as a single pre-assembled block of information. It takes up exactly 1 slot on the working memory table. It's highly automatized.
Okay.
But the moment you have to explain, say, why you disagree with a colleague's proposal, you are forced to build a novel sentence. The complexity spikes, mental translation kicks in, you exceed the capacity limit, and the verbal output simply stops.
But, okay, if this is just a fixed mechanical limit of working memory capacity, it seems like it should happen consistently.
Right, you'd think so.
Every time a learner tries to build a complex sentence, they should freeze. But that is not what the case studies show at all. The data shows incredible variability. A learner might speak beautifully with a friend on Tuesday and then completely freeze in a meeting on Wednesday. So what changes?
Well, the working memory bottleneck is only half the equation. To understand the variability, we really have to look at the psychological environment. Our brains have a built-in grading system that directly interferes with the mechanical generation of speech. Linguistics researchers call this the self-monitoring loop.
The self-monitoring loop. So the monitor acts as an internal editor. Its job is to check your language output for correctness, right?
Exactly.
And a small amount of monitoring is useful, I assume, for catching mistakes and improving accuracy over time.
Oh, for sure. But during a live, fluid conversation, excessive self-monitoring becomes disastrous. We run into an issue called dual task interference.
Dual task interference.
Yeah. One part of your brain is trying to generate a sentence, pulling vocabulary and assembling grammar. Simultaneously, another part of your brain is acting like a strict teacher with a red pen, trying to grade the sentence for errors before you even say it out loud.
That editor is taking up precious space on our already crowded working memory table.
Yes, exactly.
And the research highlights that this internal editor goes into absolute overdrive when we add external pressure, creating something called social evaluative stress.
This is a fascinating intersection of linguistics and biology. When you speak to someone you perceive as an evaluator, now this could be a native speaker, a hiring manager, or even just a peer you really want to impress.
Right.
Your brain perceives a high social cost to making a mistake. And this triggers a measurable physical stress response in the body.
The nervous system reacts as if there is literally a physical threat in the room. The heart rate increases, and the body releases stress hormones.
And one of those primary stress hormones is cortisol. The biological reality here is crucial because cortisol directly impairs the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these are the exact regions of the brain responsible for working memory and active verbal retrieval. The stress hormone chemically blocks the pathway to your internal library.
It's like typing your computer password.
Yeah.
You do it perfectly 100 times a day. It's complete muscle memory. You don't even look at your hands.
Right.
But the second someone is standing directly behind your shoulder, just watching you type it, you suddenly forget it.
Yeah.
The password didn't disappear from your brain.
Yeah.
The stress of being observed, that social evaluative threat, it chemically blocked your ability to retrieve it.
That is a perfect analogy. And what's fascinating here is that this biological mechanism perfectly explains the good days versus bad days phenomenon that frustrates so many learners. Their objective knowledge of the language has not changed by a single vocabulary word between Tuesday and Wednesday. The only variable that changed was the situational stress load. The office meeting triggered the stress hormones, the hormones impaired the working memory, and the active retrieval just shut down.
Which leads to a massive, tragic trap for learners that the sources call the misdiagnosis problem.
Yes, the misdiagnosis problem. Because the freeze physically feels identical to forgetting, learners misdiagnose the root cause of their struggle. They experience the silent gap and they conclude, oh, I do not know enough words. My grammar is too weak.
And based on that faulty diagnosis, they return to the exact same passive methods that caused the imbalance in the first place.
They buy a thicker grammar textbook.
They download another flashcard application.
They spend hours reading news articles.
They are trying to solve an active retrieval problem by adding more passive input.
Right. Think of the working memory bottleneck like a literal traffic jam on a highway. The cars represent vocabulary, and the highway represents the retrieval speed. Studying more grammar to fix a freezing problem is like trying to fix a traffic jam by buying more cars.
That makes no sense.
The problem is not a lack of cars. The problem is the limited capacity of the road. And this fundamental misdiagnosis is the primary reason so many dedicated learners feel stuck at an intermediate plateau for years.
That paints a very clear picture of why the traditional approach fails. We have now diagnosed the core issues. We know that freezing is a symptom of working memory overload and stress-induced retrieval failure, not a lack of underlying knowledge. So, how do we fix the road?
Right, let's fix it.
The research provides clear, evidence-based interventions to help learners rewire their brains for active production.
The first major intervention targets the mechanics of working memory overload. The literature refers to this as chunking or automaticity training.
Chunking. We mentioned earlier that simple phrases like good morning bypass the working memory limit because they are stored as a single block.
Exactly.
So the goal here is to intentionally build more of those pre-assembled blocks for complex conversations.
Fluent speakers rarely build sentences completely from scratch. They rely heavily on these pre-assembled chunks of language. So instead of studying isolated vocabulary words, a learner should deliberately practice common conversational structures until they become automatic.
But like what, for example?
For example, transition phrases, opinion openers, or ways to clarify a point.
Oh, I see. So if you memorize an entire phrase, like, from my perspective, it seems that as one single unbroken unit, you don't have to spend any working memory conjugating the verbs or placing the prepositions.
You simply deploy the chunk. It takes up one slot on your working memory table instead of 6. And by bypassing the grammar construction phase for the structural parts of your sentence, you free up massive amounts of mental energy.
Wow.
You can then use that energy to focus on the actual idea you are trying to communicate.
That addresses the mechanical overload perfectly. But we also have to address the biological stress response. How does a learner stop cortisol from blocking their retrieval pathways during a real conversation?
The solution to that lies in a concept called low-stakes practice. Because social evaluative stress is the primary trigger for freezing, learners must systematically practice speaking in environments where mistakes carry zero social consequences.
So what does this all mean for the listener's daily routine? Do they just walk around talking to themselves?
Yes, literally yes. Narrating your daily actions out loud when you are entirely alone is a highly effective, scientifically backed method.
Just alone in your living room.
Exactly. You are slowly retraining your nervous system. By physically speaking the language out loud in an empty room, you are teaching your brain to separate the act of speaking from the feeling of social risk. You are getting the physical repetitions without the audience.
The sources also suggest practicing with peers who are at a similar language level. The social evaluative threat drops significantly when you are speaking with someone who is also making mistakes.
Absolutely.
You can also use low-stakes digital tools like conversational AI programs, or simply record a voice memo on your smartphone and play it back.
Recording yourself is a particularly elegant tool. It introduces a very mild layer of performance pressure because, you know you will have to listen to the playback.
Oh, right, yeah.
But it completely removes the real-time social threat. And this leads directly into the third evidence-based intervention, which is active retrieval practice.
Because we know that self-directed learners naturally gravitate toward passive input, right? Because it's comfortable. We have to intentionally close the gap between the massive passive library and the tiny active index.
The research emphasizes that you have to force the brain to practice the active recall pathway. But the good news is that it does not require hours of exhausting study. The data suggests that even 5 to 10 minutes of dedicated daily speaking practice can physically alter retrieval speed.
Just 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah. You might read an interesting article and then immediately spend 3 minutes summarizing the main points out loud to your empty kitchen. Or you might use a timer to practice answering a random prompt in 30 seconds, simulating the real pace of a conversation.
Finally, the research outlines the specific technique to dismantle the heavy cognitive load of mental translation. A learner must reduce their dependency on their native language.
Yes.
But they can't do this by trying to think about complex philosophy right away. The working memory will just crash again.
The key is to start incredibly small. You practice the habit of thinking in the second language using very short, simple bursts throughout your daily routine.
Simple bursts.
Right. You look at your coffee cup and intentionally think the sentence, "I am making coffee." You look at the clock and think, "I need to leave soon."
You keep the concept so foundational that your brain does not need to lean on the native language to construct the thought. You are building direct, independent pathways between the concept and the second language vocabulary.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of language acquisition, learning to speak fluently requires the exact same incremental, mechanical approach used in any other physical or cognitive skill.
Right.
I mean, you would never expect to successfully run a marathon simply because you read a dozen books about the mechanics of running.
Yeah, definitely not.
You have to step outside and jog around the block first. You have to build the specific active muscles required for the specific physical task.
Let's gather the core insights from these sources, because this fundamentally shifts how a learner should approach their daily practice. First, we have to separate the skills. Comprehension is a passive recognition process. Production is an active, real-time generative process.
Right.
Being strong in one does not automatically translate to being strong in the other.
Second, the phenomenon of freezing mid-sentence is a mechanical and psychological issue. It's not a knowledge deficit. Your working memory is experiencing a bottleneck due to mental translation.
Yeah.
And that bottleneck is frequently amplified by a biological stress response to social evaluation.
And finally, the solution to the silent gap is not more passive reading or thicker grammar books. The solution requires low-stakes, active retrieval practice. It means chunking phrases to save memory space, speaking out loud in safe environments to lower stress, and gently retraining the nervous system.
It completely reframes the challenge, doesn't it? The knowledge is already there. The focus just needs to shift to the retrieval pathway. And this actually leaves me with a fascinating, lingering thought from the psychological research.
Oh, what does the research suggest?
Well, we have spent this entire conversation framing the silent DAP as a challenge unique to second language learners. But if the root causes are working memory overload and social evaluative stress,
Right.
could these exact same biological mechanisms explain why even highly articulate native speakers suddenly blank out during a high-stakes job interview or a major public speaking event?
Oh, wow. That makes perfect logical sense. When the social stakes become impossibly high, the cortisol floods the system, and even the native language library becomes inaccessible. The brain machinery is exactly the same. If the social pressure is intense enough, anyone's working memory will crash.
It highlights that this freeze is simply a deeply human physiological response to pressure.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the silent gap. We hope exploring the science behind the freeze gives you a much kinder perspective on your own learning journey. The next time you find yourself pausing in a conversation, remember the mechanics at play.
The words are safely stored in your library.
You simply need to keep practicing the low-stakes active retrieval to build the index. Take your time, keep practicing those short bursts, and we will catch you on the next deep dive. Take care.